Well, it's time that I make a little bit of an update video. So about 1.5 years ago, I made a video about the best custom PC for an artist under $750. And artist as kind of a broad encompassing term. Content creator, someone who makes art in Photoshop, who edits videos in Premiere, or who does 3D modeling, or the general all-encompassing creator PC. So, 1.5 years has happened, and things have changed, and there's a lot to update on this list, but it will carry a similar theme. But I have been asked to make this video, and a few people have commented on the last one, and I feel it's really necessary. So let's get into it. Everything that's mentioned on this price list will probably fluctuate in price over time, so check the date of the video and you'll see why that is. But generally speaking, you can swap out some of these parts for very, very similar parts, and it'll be pretty much the same experience. So brand isn't the most important thing, but I have curated a list that I believe to be pretty good. So let's get right into it. Let's start with the motherboard. So a motherboard is something that you want to make sure is compatible with the rest of the parts on the list. So you usually can start with the part that's most important with you and then build off of it from there. So we are going to be picking Ryzen CPUs, since right now they offer the most bang for the buck, and they're actually starting to pull ahead of Intel as far as performance, especially for creators. AMD is better when it comes to multiple processes and multitasking, which is very important when you're doing creative work. So I picked the MSI B450 Tomahawk. It's an X470, which is the last generation chipset. It's not outdated, it's just that X570 just came out, but X570 is extremely expensive, and it works with the latest third generation of Ryzen CPUs that just came out yesterday. Now, you can swap different motherboards for this, and this motherboard will work with the current generation of Ryzen's, but it also works with the 2000 series very well. It was designed for that series, and leading into it, we're going to talk about the AMD Ryzen 2700 instead of the 3600, which is what I thought I'd be recommending for this build. Now, you can still go with the Ryzen 5 3600. It is an excellent chip for $200. It's 6-core, 12 threads, and it can clock up to 4.4 gigahertz. I believe that's the one that it does it. That's either the X or the 36, but either way. Very high core clocks for 6 cores, beats out a lot of Intel's competition, but the Ryzen 2700, which is the last generation's Ryzen 7, is an 8-core, 16-thread CPU that clocks up to 4.1 gigahertz, but it has those extra cores. Now, if you're doing a lot of multitasking, those cores are going to be very, very useful. Now, if you only do Photoshop and you like to game a lot, then I'll recommend the 3600 instead of the 2700. But if you do a lot of video editing or work with 3D software, Ryzen 2700 is the best bet. Now, I'll put both in the description because then you can decide which is best for you, but that's kind of the general stipulation there. This chip did used to cost a lot more, but since the new generation came out, they brought the price down, so they're both the same price at $200. Get it? Got it? Good. Okay, so next we're gonna pick the RAM. So DDR4 is your standard, that is what you have to pick. When it comes to Ryzen, the faster the RAM is, the better. So we're gonna go for at least 3000 megahertz. That's because Ryzen performs better when you give it more of clock speed in the RAM. So let's go for the shiny stuff. So I have in here on the list the Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro, 16 gigabytes at 3200 megahertz. That's $94.99. This is where you're going to have to shop just a little bit. This is excellent RAM, but you may not care about the RGB, and you may find one that's cheaper at a similar clock speed, and you're it's more power to you. You make that choice, but definitely don't go under 16 gigabytes. 16 gigabytes is a good spot to start with. It'll give you a little bit of headroom, but once you start getting into more heavy stuff, you might want to upgrade to 32, which is okay because you will have extra room on this board. You'll have 2 more slots. There's 4 slots for the RAM, so you can throw a couple extra RAM sticks in later on, but just make sure that they're the same kind. It doesn't perform well if you're mixing and matching RAM. So whatever it is, make sure that it's RAM that you don't mind buying again in the future. Got it? Okay, so feel free to swap that out for a different RAM if you want to save a little bit of money. I don't know how prices are going to change. Okay, next, a boot drive. Boot drive is very important. You're gonna want to get an SSD. It's imperative, especially one that's big enough to not only hold the OS, but the software that you're going to be loading onto it, which my guess is going to be the Adobe Creative Suite. So if you get a 128 gigabyte SSD plus Windows, you're not going to have a lot of space left over if you're loading in the whole Adobe Creative Suite. So go for a 240 gigabyte SSD, then you'll have a little bit more room, a little more headroom, even for some files that you want to have a quick load, in case you want to work with some files that are immediate projects so that they load faster. It's good to have that. So 240 gigabytes Kingston SSD, decent for the price, not bad. You could go a little bit higher if you want. In fact, I would recommend going with a bigger SSD, but if you want to stay true to the budget, get this one, and then get a secondary drive, which would be the Western Digital Blue 1 terabyte drive. Now again, if you're going to be working in large files, you could upgrade this to get a bigger one. I think Seagate's Barracuda 2 terabytes is fairly cheap. You could get that as well, but again, not too important. I just kind of want to give you an idea of what to do. So SSDs are really expensive, so you try to keep primarily your programs on there. And then for regular hard drives, get one that spins fast at 7200 RPMs, and then you can put the majority of your bulk files on there. It's not going to matter too much if they're smaller than a program, which I'm talking about gigabytes here. So videos, pictures, those kinds of things will fit fine on this 1 terabyte drive. But you will have room. I think there is 4 SATA slots on the motherboard, so you can put extra drives in later if you want to save up for those, or if you need them later. Next, graphics card. Now this, in my last video, was where things were weird, because at that exact time, there was the GPU crisis where crypto miners were buying up all the graphics cards and they were really expensive. So the card we can get in this one now is a little bit better. You do have options here, but if we're thinking about productivity and productivity mostly alone, then we'll go with the RX 580. Now that's an 8 gigabyte card with GDDR5 video RAM, and it's very good. AMD's, again, both sides of the thing, they're very good when it comes to productivity with their products. So when you're talking about rendering for this price, this is probably the best bang for the buck card you can get at this moment, because it's around the price of $150 at the time of this video, which is really good. Nothing on NVIDIA's side comes even close to this when it comes to performance at this price. So I would recommend that, and it's actually a really good gaming card too if you want to do some gaming on the side. It can do anything at 1080p Ultra and even some 1440p titles that are a little bit lower in the settings. You can do that, but even more esport titles, you'll be able to play them 1440p max, no problem. So it's a good card. I'm throwing that in here. Keeps the price low. Okay, now the case, again, wiggle room. It depends how flashy you want. You could get basically a box, $20 box, if you really wanted to, if you didn't care whatsoever. But cases do have some importance to them. They offer protection, utility, ease to work with, and also good cooling for your system. If your system is too closed off, your system will overheat and perform worse. If it has good ventilation or room to add fans into, or room to add water cooling in the future, then you're good to go. Which I forgot to mention, both CPUs, the 3600 and the 2700, come with coolers that are adequate. You probably won't be able to overclock really, because they're good, but they're not good enough for that. So You can save up later on and get an extra cooler, but these will do at their given rates there, words. Anyway, so you don't have to worry about getting cooling. But if you want to overclock, invest in some water cooling later on, which comes back to the case, the MATREXX case. I've been interested in getting this in the past, but I ended up with a different case. It's the NZXT H500i, I believe it is what it's called. Very common name with different things. Anyway, getting off track. So it's a pretty case. It's a very big case, I will mention that, but that means that it can fit an eATX motherboard in the future should you want to go humongous, so you can get it later on. Anyway, I threw it in there. It's about 50 bucks. You can add some fans in later. It has a lot of room to work with. That's why I added it in there, because then I covered my butt so that you can do whatever you wanted in there and you'll be safe. So 50 bucks for the case. You can change that to whatever you want, but that's just a suggestion. Last and definitely not least is the Thermaltake RGB 500 watt PSU. Now, 500 watts will be enough and sufficient for the system. I believe that the system's total power draw will be around 380 watts or so, so it gives you a little bit of headroom, but it's not like going overboard either. Now, you don't have to get the RGB. I just saw that and it was at a good price, and it's 80 plus certified, which is important. Do not cheap out on your power supply, because if your power supply craps out on you, your whole system will go kaput, and all that hard-earned money will circle down the drain. So get a good power supply. This one is fine. You can pick another one, just make sure it's 80 plus. You could go a little bit higher, 650, 750 is a little overboard. You could do it if you have big plans for the future and adding extra things, but not necessary, okay? Now, I didn't mention the OS on here, which would be Windows. I didn't add that into the price because you don't technically need to pay for Windows. And I'm not talking about pirating it. I'm talking about taking the media creation tool that comes with Windows, which they supply you, putting a thumbstick in a previous laptop or computer, anything that runs Windows, and then you can basically copy Windows to your new computer and then boot it as the OS. You'll have a little activate Windows watermark in the corner that will be there until you activate it, which would be a Windows key wherever you purchase it. You can buy them for 20 bucks on like Kingwin or something like that for real cheap. They're OEM models. They're made for manufacturers and suppliers like that, so they're usually pretty legal, but just saying, you don't have to add that cost right away. You could buy a regular version, but you could start off with that. It doesn't disable you from doing anything with your computer except like changing the color scheme. That's pretty much it, and it'll have that watermark there. So, but either way, you don't need to worry about it yet. You can worry about that later. Don't feel like you have to buy it right away. That's all I'm gonna say. Well, that about does it, and the whole total comes to around $750-ish, sometimes a little less, maybe sometimes a little bit more, but that's the overall sort of ballpark figure. Okay, I did it. I made my update. Those are my recommendations. Let me know what you thought. All the items I mentioned on the list will be listed below, so feel free to check them out. They are affiliate links, so I do get kickbacks for it. So if you want to support the channel, please buy through those. Oh, and if you find something else that you like on Amazon, if you went through my link, I still get credit for it. So feel free to go hog wild on Amazon. You can check Newegg too, but Amazon's better. Anyway, that's it for today's video. If you want another build list at a different price point, let me know, because turns out there's a lot of options now. I could go even cheaper. Alright guys, I'll see you later.